Father is here to rape your enemies, and today I'm gonna be telling you how to build her best. Let's get into it. Without a doubt, 4-piece Fragment of Harmonic Whimsy is Arlecchino's best in slot set. Brand spanking new and tailor-made specifically for her. A nice bit of attack percent which she appreciates, and the 4-piece can allow her to deal up to 54% more damage. But is this new set really worth your resin? This is an especially pressing question when 4-piece Gladiators is just 10% worse than the new pick. Arlecchino is a normal attack-based unit, so the 4-piece buff is excellent. Also, whether you're a newborn player or if your account has been through the trenches of time, you should have decent Glad pieces laying around. Strong boxable 4-piece Crimson Witch of Flames is another spicy Arlecchino pick. It's actually pretty comparable to Gladiators in a vape team, but in Overload and Monopyro it falls off. When it comes to stacks, 2 is possible, but you're usually better off sticking to 1. You can extend your rotation by doing something like a second Yolan E and working on energy funneling. Then you can EQE with Arlecchino, since your E will be back in time for your next rotation if you spend a long enough time funneling. But this is very situational and will only be good if you're in a situation where extending your rotation is ideal, and a second Yolan E at C0 is clunky to pull off. A little further behind but not too far off would be 4-piece Gilded Dreams. I do want to know that this is a conditional set because it doesn't work in her best in slot team, Overload. You get a neat attack buff for every fellow Pyro teammate and some EM for every Hydro you pair her with. Excellent for Vaporized comps. Quite bad in Overload. Don't deliberately farm for this if you don't already have good pieces lying around. 2-piece combos include 2-piece attack percent, Pyro percent, EM, and double attack percent. 2-piece Pyro and attack will perform nearly the same as 4-piece Gilded Dreams. So if you need a cheap placeholder until you can get a full 4-piece, this is your best bet. Mixing attack together will barely be behind Pyro percent though. And even her worst combination is within 15% of Arlecchino's best in slot. So she'll be friendly 4-piece wise, just go for her best substats. Vape comps will bring up the value of 2-piece EM significantly, so shoot for 2-piece Pyro percent and EM in that case. You'll reap the most rewards. Please don't crush my skull for that one, Arlecchino. Speaking of which, main stats aren't that hard with our accursed knave. They include attack percent, damage percent, crit percent, and for vape teams, EM, damage percent, crit percent. EM becomes more valuable than attack within vape comps, but juicy boost to the reaction multiplier is just too sumptuous to ignore. In Monopyro comps, EM has pretty much no value, so it's much better to go for attack percent, and in Overload, you also want to prioritize attack. Substats include. In terms of how much ER you want for Arlecchino, it's going to depend on team comp and how many favs you're running in a team. For Overload, you want this much. For Vaporize, you want this much. And at last, for Monopyro, you want this much. Arlecchino heals herself with her burst, so having enough ER to fire away when you need to is pretty important, not to mention the damage. For Vaporize sets, her signature will of course be best in slot, but Gladiators is a sublime substitute with Crimson Witch of Flames coming in close. Overload really hates Crimson Witch of Flames, and EM is going to have the least amount of bite here. Best sets still remain. Monopyro wise, the top 2 remain the same, it's the rest of the ranking that changes. Now, what spear does our grim lady use to unleash pure chaos? All hell breaks loose with R1 Crimson Moon Semblance. This adds a bond of life to Arlecchino, directly linking this passive to your kit, making it one of the best signature weapons in Genshin Impact. And she gets damage bonus based off of it, which is an incredible buff to get. Nice crit rate stick too with plenty of base attack to boot. Plus, it turns into a scythe, which is sick. Signature weapons have always been tailored to their respective unit. This is nothing new, but Bond of Life is a mechanic that only Arlecchino uses as of now. We've never faced such a particularly tailored choice before. It literally beats out all of our 5-star options by about 15 to 20%. I'd say that's pretty fair for a signature. What's special here is that this is against other 5-star options. Her next best option for vape teams especially would be Staff of the Scarlet Sands. A vape Arlecchino wants an EM Sands, and this choice has incredible EM scaling. You get less base attack than signature, but nice crit rate in return. It does fall a little harder in Overload and Monopyro teams. Then we hop onto Page AWS. So why is this selection so delicious for Arlecchino? Well, she stacks the passive better than most who can use it as well. She's a DPS who deals in normals, so you can take good advantage of the attack buff given and gain access to the damage bonus easily. Not to mention that the stats given through Weapon Ascension are nearly identical to her signature. And also, her best team has no Bennett. High base attack makes this heckin' valuable. Now, let's check out Homa. This does actually get pretty tasty if you have less than 50% HP on Arlecchino. You'll actually be able to use the passive often enough, which is nice. Of course, the stats given are good as well. It's weaker if you can't always keep the passive up, but that shouldn't be an issue with our Knave. What I like is that this applies well to every Arlecchino team. R5 Deathmatch is a viable contender too. It's not that much worse at R1 either. Good pick, mostly for the attack percent it gives. There isn't much more to this choice, it simply just provides stats that Arlecchino likes. It'll be your best bet for a 4-star pick. But in vape teams, don't underestimate Ballad of the Fjords. That juicy EM multiplier strikes again, and it's actually a fairly good choice if you play her in these comps. The main issue is that it loses to deathmatch hard once you opt to switch her into Mono Pyro or Overload. For complete free-to-plays, you have R5 White Tassel. Now, don't be fooled. Just because all of those daunting expensive options are significantly better for her, does not mean that she herself is bad with this free-to-play pick. Her damage potential is still quite high, even with this lower tier option. You can use this wonderfully cheap pick to take advantage of a normal damage bonus in the passive, clear just fine with this, and be aware that juicier options are right around the corner. The main flaw of White Tassel is that in Overload teams, if you're playing the non-Bennett variant, which will be Arlecchino's strongest, this weapon has incredibly low base attack and you won't have access to many attack buffs. That's where this choice falls off a bit. Think about Noivelet. Just because his signature is incredible for him does not mean that a prototype Amber Nuve is a weak DPS. Most would agree that this is a stupid line of thinking, so why would it apply any differently to Arlecchino? I spoke about all the best options here, but you can see where your personal pick ranks between Arle's best 3 archetypes. She isn't unplayable without her signature, just gets a nice benefit off of it. This is what I'd like to call a character with a high baseline, yet a high value vertical investment path as well. Who has Arlecchino kidnapped to fight by her side? Well, she has 3 different archetypes she can employ. Let's start with Overload teams. These comps have a 30-second rotation at least when playing with the Yai official variant, and the rotation is split into 2 parts. The main benefit of this comp is that over a full rotation, it will deal the most damage. There's 2 variants here. The first one is with Arlecchino, Chevrus, Fischl, and Yai Miko. You get plenty of sub-DPS in this comp, and with Chevrus, you get those sweet Overload buffs. But if you want to focus more on buffing Arlecchino and dropping Yai's sub-DPS, you can use Bennett over the Fox. The rotation switches up then as well. Yai can also be replaced with Beto for more AoE situations, and Fischl will fuel up Beto's ER. Now for Vaporize. This comp is good for speedrunning because this team has enough DPS within the first 20 seconds to rotate a boss in one go. Granted, you have the artifact investment to do so, whereas Overload has its rotations split into 2 parts, and it does not have enough DPS to one rotate within that first part. This team consists of Arlecchino, Yelan, Bennett, and Kazuha. Yelan can be replaced with Xingqiu, and Kazuha with Sucrose, or if you want a defensive option, then Zhongli. Just note that that will drop your DPS quite a bit. Yelan offers plenty of sub-DPS and allows Arlecchino to vape. Not only that, but some ramping damage bonus percent for Arlecchino. Bennett gives a nice attack buff, though Arlecchino can't be healed, so survivability might be a little tough, be careful of that. Get good at dodging. Kazuha of course gives even more damage bonus percent and 4-piece VV shred. Zephos or Fav can also give out team-wide energy. Sucrose's EM share is excellent for vape, but be aware that since Arlecchino's rotations are complex, her usual clunkiness will feel especially difficult in this team. Zhongli trades some damage for comfort, yet he still gives out a universal 20% res shred and can hold 4-piece instructors or tenacity for team buffing. You can also opt to play double Hydro Arlecchino, where you drop Kazuha, Sucrose, or Zhongli for Xingqiu, and then go to town. Then for Mono Pyro. This is Arlecchino's best AoE team. The comp is simple, you just swap Yelan in her best vape team for Xiangling. She'll help take care of AoE. Kazuha is especially good here since damage bonus has plenty of value in mono teams. Also, 3 Pyros means that Xiangling's ER requirements won't be as grievous as they always are. Arlecchino also gets a nice benefit off of that. You can replace Kazuha for Zhongli if you're struggling to survive as well, but remember, it is worth noting that Arlecchino can heal herself within her kit, and that she gains resistance to survive on her own. So options for extra survivability are only for extremely comfortable play, or otherwise if you're personally having survivability issues. Arlecchino's teams all tend to be very flexible, and she's a DPS who isn't just locked to one single vape archetype. This shakes things up a bit, and she isn't only delegated to being another plain old vaporized DPS. After all, we already have quite a high saturation of pyro DPSs. Super cool to have a limited 5-star who works best in slot with Overload now. So now that we know Arlecchino's best teams, how do you play them? After all, they're complex as all heck. Let's start with Arlecchino Overload. For the Arle Yai Overload variant, start with Arle E, Yai E, Chev Q E, Visual E, Arle Charge Attack, then 2 and 4, Arle Q E, Yai Q E, Chev E, Visual Q, Arle CA, 4 and 4. For the Bennett Overload variant, Arle E, Visual Charge Attack, Chivalrous QE, Bennett Q, Visual E Q, Arle Charge Attack, 5 and 4. Note that when it comes to Overload, since the rotation is split into 2 parts and the first part of a rotation will do less damage than the second part, it's more of a comfortable rotation if you're okay with clearing Abyss a little slower than a vape team, but having less intensive clearing experiences. It'll also do the most amount of damage over a long period of time, so that's the main difference. Then let's look at Arlecchino's Vaporize archetype. A complex team, but one that yields a ton of short-term damage out of it. Vaporize's combo is Arle E, Q, E, Yalan E, Q, Bennett Q, Kazuha Hold E, Arle Charge Attack, 5 and 4. As for Mono Pyro, you'll go Arle E, Kazuha E, Q, Bennett Q, E, Changling E, Q, Arle Charge Attack, 5 and 4. You want to play this in AoE since Changling can help take care of that. Kazuha has his Sublime Grouping of course, and Arlecchino has naturally high AoE thanks to her normal attacks having such a wide range. These will all be her highest damaging rotations for each respective comp. Give it some time and you'll get there in the end. Get a feel for Arlecchino's playstyle and then learn the team rotation which best fits your intended use for her. Yet how does Arlecchino actually work? Her regular normals just do 6 physical strikes, nothing too special, but when she's under Bond of Life, it has some different effects. Her normals are converted into Pyro and get a movement value buff based on consuming the amount of Bond of Life she has active at the time. The movement value buff she gets is not like New Valettes, more like what you get out of Redhorn or a Hytham signatures, and every time she sucks away her Bond of Life, Arlecchino decreases her skill's cooldown by 0.8 seconds. Another important tip. Arlecchino's normal attack range is larger than average for a DPS of her kind, which means that she will have a much better time hitting enemies in an AoE fashion. She has more AoE than about 75% of the DPS cast in the game. By the way, Invitation to a Beheading. Geez, what a freaking insane talent name. Father really does have no chill. Her skill will have her dash forward and apply a mark to enemies. We'll just refer to it as the mark to keep things simple, since Hoyoverse words can get a little convoluted. This mark lasts 30 seconds and deals 2 instances of pyro damage, 5 seconds each. When she does a charge attack or uses her burst, Arlecchino gains a Bond of Life based on 65% of her HP. She can get up to 145% Bond of Life through this method, and once you use her skill again, both the amount of Bond of Life she has and the duration on it reset. Now, what exactly is Bond of Life? It's an integral part of Arlecchino's kit, yet we've pretty much never heard anything of it before her addition to the game. What you need to know is that this mechanic isn't exactly new. Certain enemies are already able to apply this effect onto you, and have been able to for quite some time. Even within the Abyss, for example, most 2 local legends can apply Bond of Life on your characters. It's just that Arlecchino happens to be the first character who actually applies it to her kit. It's a percentage-based value which will have its effects determined by how the character's respective kit synergizes with it. As for what Bond of Life actually does on its own, it absorbs healing effects that a character receives. Arlecchino already negates all healing in her kit, which we'll touch on in a moment, but if a character has Bond of Life active, they cannot be healed. The only way to get rid of Bond of Life is by healing it off of your characters, which is why Arlecchino can't be healed, so her Bond of Life mechanics aren't screwed with by the game's own personal Bond of Life mechanics. Her burst will clear all enemy marks around her and deal pyro damage, clears her skill cooldown, and then heals herself. The healing is based on Bond of Life value and how much attack she has, so that's how she stays alive. As for passives, Arlecchino's first passive gives her a Bond of Life with a 130% value for 5 seconds after defeating an enemy, and 5 seconds after a mark is applied on an enemy, it gets upgraded, and Arlecchino gains a Bond of Life worth 130%, so either way, you get some free Bond of Life here. Her A1 gives her 1% elemental and physical res for every 100 attack she has above 1000. She can get up to 20% through this way. And as for her A4, Arlecchino gains a 40% damage bonus, and in exchange, she cannot be healed at all. Her talent priorities, it's simple. All her talents are important to some degree as a hyper carry, but you really should aim to chunk up those normals. That her main damage source with her skill and burst being less important, think of it like how Nuve's skill and burst are just kind of there. They're worth leveling, but only once that normal attack of hers has been fully beefed up. It's the main meat of her kit. For those curious about how much damage share each of her talents make up individually, here you go. Now let's discuss Constellations. With Arlecchino, her cons are actually pretty damn good and are decently big upgrades for her. Her normals get a massive value increase of 100%, which is splendid. Not only that, but she gains more interruption res when performing her charge attacks and normals. Pretty darn neat. Especially great when you consider how fragile she is survivability wise. Her marks are immediately upgraded the moment she applies them. Saves you some nice time. Now for something even crazier. When Arlecchino absorbs these upgraded marks, she'll unleash a freaking Bale Moon Bloodfire, which deals 900% of her attack as pyro damage. This then increases her elemental and physical res by 20% for 15 seconds. Survivability up once again. Really solid C2. This increases her normals by +3, naturally a great increase considering this is her main source of damage. Excellent that it's been put down at C3 as well as opposed to C5. Happy that Genshin's been putting +3 NA increases for some time now, and Unity really appreciate it. I think that if you're a low spender looking to highly invest, this is a good stopping point. When Arlecchino successfully absorbs some marks, her burst cooldown will decrease by 2 seconds and she'll get 15 elemental energy, so less ER requirements. Neat. This can occur once every 10 seconds. It's an alright con, more just something to pick up on the way to C6. Increases the level of her burst by +3, a nice and welcome increase. C6 time. Is Father worth wailing on? Let's have a look. The damage of Arlecchino's burst now gets multiplied by 700% of Arlecchino's current Bond of Life percentage, in the same way that her normal's Bond of Life buff works. Wowza. Damage, eh?
That's a lot of damage.
Definitely put some more emphasis on her burst. For 20 seconds after Arlecchino uses her skill, both her normals and burst gain 10% increased crit rate and 70% increased crit damage. A neat buff, and this can occur once every 15 seconds. It's not a bad C6 at all, pretty decent actually. I think it's solid. I wouldn't say it's C6 Nouvellette, Farina, or Yolande tier, but it's still pretty good. My advice is that since Arlecchino is a complex character, don't pull for her C6 if you're looking for a totally mindless C6 that can just blast out damage left, right, and center without much effort. If you're okay with having a little bit of skill required, then yeah, this is decent. Should you go for R1 or C1, I hear you ask? Both are quite substantial increases to Arlecchino. I would say go for R1. Seasoned funeral mains are just gonna yell, get both! Her C1 is excellent of course, but not necessary. It's not that her signature is either, but the passive is so tailor-made for Arlecchino and is miles ahead of every other pick for her, so get that first. Then go for C1. C2 is pretty decent if you want it, and her C3 is also quite a relevant increase, so C3 R1 is where I'd recommend stopping unless you have interest in C6ing her, of course. Father is quite the impressive pyro DPS. I think that when it comes to modern DPSs, no, she is not the next Nouvellette, and I still think that Linny is pretty much better than her. But she is undeniably strong, does pretty well at low investment, and has really solid high investment. If you want an impressive pyro DPS that has a super solid skill ceiling, then Arlecchino is the DPS for you. Hopefully this guide was able to get your Arlecchino reaping the souls of her foes mercilessly. This has been Juice, signing out. And if Arlecchino has taught us anything, don't mess with her kids, otherwise you can kiss your skull goodbye.